Today in Stronger Than Reason, we pretend it's 20 years ago and dig into Blue Man Group and Venus Hum. Welcome to Stronger Than Reason. So, a lot of my interests have to do with corner cases or oddities or things that don't fit squarely into one category or another. I like it when things overlap or overstep their bounds. To this day, if I go into a bookstore, I'm looking for a book that doesn't fit into any particular genre. I don't want a book that's just about hard-boiled crime or mystery or horror, romance, or a thinly veiled biography, or a book only about my feelings. My ideal book would mash all of those things up along with an instruction manual for a 1973 Chevy Malibu and a dash of techno-nerdery like cryptography or AI, and maybe even blending the line between fiction and nonfiction. And the novel that I wrote is kind of like that. It's all over the place. It's got ideas, but it also has characters. There's a little bit of everything. And that's one of the things that draws me to music that's alternative, industrial, and electronic, that sense of experimentalism, that willingness to synthesize ideas and sounds and concepts from a wide variety of sources. The results are always new and are most of the time pretty interesting. More interesting to me anyway than picking up the latest adult-oriented rock flavor of the month or the most recent James Patterson novel. I'd argue that most of the bands I've talked about on here fall into that sort of category. Some might seem stale and flat by today's standards, but in their heydays, they were right there on the edge doing things no one had ever done before. In general, when I'm consuming media, I really want most of all to be surprised and delighted, and that's why 9 times out of 10 I'll go to a music or bookstore and come out empty-handed. But when I do find something, I'm very excited about it, I'm into it, and I think my library and my music collection back that up, because compared to some people, I have maybe not as many books, but it's a very eclectic collection, and I do tend to dig deep into authors and bands that I really like. So let's go back to the winter of '99 for a minute, and by that I mean December 1999. See, when you say the winter of some year, it's ambiguous, because do you mean the beginning or the end of the year? Speaking of oddities and corner cases, someday maybe I'll do a whole episode on the quirks of the Gregorian calendar. I could easily rant for an hour, or a micro fortnight. But yeah, in December 1999, there I was strolling around my local Borders Books and Music looking at CDs. And it's hard for me now to believe I ever had the time for that, but back in the day, I really would look at every single CD in the store, because you never knew. You never knew, right? And I didn't want to miss anything. In this case, I didn't have to browse very long, though, because I found what I was looking for right there in the B section. And here it is. It's the new CD by Blue Man Group called Audio. Now, let me back up a little bit here, okay? Everyone knows what Blue Man Group is today for the most part. At least anyone who knows what it is has pretty much already written it off as passé and several decades stale, right? I get it. But then that's kind of this show's bread and butter. So here we are. What did I know about Blue Man Group back at the time? Well, they first came to my attention at my grandparents' house, strangely enough. No, my grandparents weren't into avant-garde performance art, because their idea of entertainment was really the Lawrence Welk Show. But they did have a subscription to Time magazine, and I did browse through it from week to week when I would visit. And lo and behold, sometime in my high school years, I stumbled across a feature about this new act in New York City that was off Broadway, and it looked pretty interesting to me. So for reasons unknown, these 3 guys had an act where they covered themselves in blue oil paint, wore matching gray jumpsuits, refused to talk, and did a lot of drumming and pantomime. And they kitted the Astor Place Theater out in lots of tubes and ducts kind of like in the movie Brazil, which, by the way, is a favorite of mine and which I will dig into here someday. And according to this article in Time, you could put your ear up to any of those tubes and hear a voice saying some kind of random message. And that's such a strange thing for me to remember, but I do remember it all these years later, because something about that whole concept just intrigued me, what they were doing there. And at the time, it was just very, very weird and original. I didn't understand the purpose of it. It wasn't a music thing, really, and it wasn't a dramatic thing, really. So what was it? It was a mystery, and the mystery was interesting. And at the time, I didn't really know what performance art was, because I was pretty sheltered growing up as I did in the burbs. As it turned out, I would get a much better idea of performance art a few years later when I'd move to the big city and attend some amateur theater. Also, similar story for free jazz, or at least something that was being passed off as free jazz. I'm still not sure it was anything, if I'm being honest, but I did like this article that I had read, and I kind of just kept it filed away in the back of my mind. Now, somewhere around this time, I also became aware of a similar sort of act, maybe, and I found out about them through cable TV, of all things, because they were selling tickets on paid commercials on cable. That act was called Stomp, and from what I could tell, it also involved a lot of drumming and something with 55-gallon oil drums and possibly paint, for all I knew. But it was also pretty clearly affiliated with dance, and at the time, I didn't have as much appreciation for dance. In my youthful, naive way, I thought dance was kind of a known quantity, having seen my share of dance recitals from my sister's troupe or from school assemblies. So in my mind, Stomp seemed kind of like an inferior Blue Man Group. They just didn't have that weirdness factor, which is what appealed to, mid-teenage year old me. So there was more mystery going on with Blue Man Group. And so that's where things stayed with me for, maybe the next 10 years, when I would find audio in that CD bin. Now, a lot had happened in that intervening time, of course. I graduated from high school and college and moved away to an entirely new town with an entirely new job, and there I met my wife. And in December of '99, I bought audio, knowing nothing about Blue Man Group other than what I had read in Time magazine all those years ago. But this was one of those moments that made it worthwhile searching music stores. That feeling when you're stumbling across something unexpected that just triggers an old memory. Kind of like finding a new thread sticking out of an old wool sweater, one thread you had forgotten to pull. And, I kind of described that happening before back in episode 19, the one about when I rediscovered the art of noise as an older teenager after seeing their video for Close to the Edit on TV as a very little kid, and then kind of falling in love with that band. So something like that happened here. So let's forget what we know about Blue Man Group today and look at this record with fresh eyes, as I did back in 1999. So what was I thinking about it at the time? I was looking at this. I was trying to make sense of it. The cover is kind of funny because here you have two blue men sitting at the mixing desk in a studio control room, with the third blue man out here in the live room playing what looks to be their big PVC instrument, which we'll talk about in a minute. So it's obvious there is a little bit of humor here, these guys in costumes playing it, producing a record. And, I'm searching this packaging, looking for answers. And what I really wanted to know was, what was Blue Man Group? And what were they hoping to accomplish by making this record? So there was really no answer here on the front cover, but it did strike me as kind of funny. So I flipped it over, and, here we go. We have a nice line drawing, very clean, with a design that immediately reminded me of 808 State's Excel. And I'm sure you don't recall that I dug deep into Excel in episode 37. But, here's the cover, just to jog your memory. And it looks something like a blueprint, right? So did these sort of line drawings in audio. And, here we have some more low-key humor. You have three blue men working together to record the sound of a chandelier smashing against the wall. One's running the tape player down here, one's holding the mic, and the third is on a ladder ready to swing the chandelier into the target. So it's funny, but it's also got this technical arty vibe that I'm already digging. And there at the bottom of the back cover is what I was really looking for, an explanation for what it is I'm holding in my hand. And it reads thus: "This is not a soundtrack. This is better. The music in Blue Man Group's theatrical productions is shaped by the action that takes place on stage and by space constraints in the theaters. On audio, these limitations are gone. This recording is designed to stand on its own and features a much larger band, as well as many of Blue Man Group's latest instrument inventions. Rather than being a show recording, audio extends the listener's experience into new parts of Blue Man Group's world." And there you have it. So what did I know at this point? Standing in the store, I knew that Blue Man Group were performance artists. They drummed. They had a sense of humor. So whatever this was, odds were good that I would like it. And reminder, kids, YouTube wouldn't be invented for another 6 years. Facebook for another 5. Hell, MySpace wouldn't come around for another 4. And Wikipedia wouldn't be a thing for another year or 2. It was still very much Web 1.0, and there was really no way for me to find out anything about this project except by buying the damn thing, and that's what I did. I took it home, I opened it up, and what did I find? Well, first of all, this was not a jewel case. It was a fold-out digipack. Some nice artwork here on the inside, and nice disc here, and most importantly, they had a big old booklet full of more information. So let's take a look in here. So as you can see, they have a lot of their own instruments that they made. A lot of them were made out of PVC pipe, which of course they play by drumming on it with various things, drumsticks and paddles and whatnot. So a lot of different configurations of PVC that we have in here. Here you have a cymbalum, which is a hammered instrument from Hungary, and they're playing it with drumsticks. So they're using old instruments in new and interesting ways, but they're also kind of making these novel new instruments in a DIY kind of way, and working with a bunch of more ordinary rock musicians to build a much fuller sound. And I just loved all this. To me, just in terms of music, it placed them up there kind of with Kraftwerk, designing their own instruments. So I was eager to hear this record. So what did it sound like? Now, I'm not going to do a track by track on this record because I have a bunch of records I want to talk about today, and we'd be here for hours, and believe me, nobody wants that. But I will speak about the album in a general sense, and in short, it's a lot of percussively driven rock music. It's all instrumental, no vocals, in a variety of moods, almost like a film score. And indeed, as I would soon see, it was more or less the score to their live show, despite what the blurb on the back said. But you didn't need the live show to enjoy the album as a standalone thing. And I especially like this album because of the lack of vocals, because at this time I was doing a lot of computer programming, and I liked to listen to music as I worked. I was listening to CDs through the CD-ROM drive on my laptop, with some earbuds, and vocals were just very distracting when I was trying to program, but I did enjoy listening to a lot of instrumental music. This was probably around the time that we had all discovered Winamp, so I might have been ripping CDs to MP3s on my work computer. Not exactly sure of the timing there, but when we were doing that, it did almost seem like the future. But little did I know that the future would hit just a few years later when Apple would release the first iPod. And that, coupled with the rise in the peer-to-peer file sharing services, would be a tremendous sea change in how and where we could listen to music. And in many ways, things would really never be the same afterward. But this album was a commercial success. It went gold and was nominated for a Grammy for Best Pop Instrumental Album. And by the way, it lost to Joe Jackson's Symphony No. 1. Who knew that the guy who did Steppin' Out in 1982 would have a big album at the turn of the century? Not me. In fact, I don't remember that album at all. But listening back to audio now, it strikes me as pretty interesting for its time, but maybe somewhat limited. Yeah, the Blue Men created their own instruments, which itself was a very industrial thing to do. But the fact is that this record just isn't as sonically adventurous as contemporary electronic and industrial acts that took advantage of sampling. There are only so many sounds that you can make with PVC pipes, after all, no matter what configuration they're in. And I think these contraptions lent themselves more to the spectacle of a show than in blowing me away on disc. But fortunately, I soon had an opportunity to put that to the test, because Mrs. Stronger Than Reason and I decided to take a trip the following summer to that locus of American excess and indulgence, Stephen King's center of all evil. That's right, Las Vegas. Being young adults, we wanted to see what the hype was about, I guess, but not being gamblers, we were more going for the sights and sounds, and as it turned out, the shows, because Blue Man Group had just started a residency at the relatively new Luxor Hotel and Casino. And if you're not familiar, this is the one designed like a great big pyramid made of black glass. So it was all quite impressive, the enormous obelisk and sphinx at the entrance, the big light beam at the top, which is reportedly the most powerful light beam on Earth, the inclinators, which were just fancy elevators that moved in an angle to match the slope of the roof, and the casino itself, which was, of course, a sensory overload of people throwing their money away. As Mr. Burns put it so neatly, "It's the perfect business. People swarm in, empty their pockets, and scuttle off. Nothing can stop me now except microscopic germs. But we won't let that happen, will we, Smithers?" So at the appointed hour, we trooped over to the attached theater, and what do I remember about the show? I remember the poncho section up front. We were just behind it. I don't recall actually getting splashed with anything. I do remember that they did play a lot of the music from audio on the show. The show itself was kind of a blend of music, art, and comedy. If you don't know the gist, if you've never really seen the act, the three Blue Men were there. There are always just three of them. They remain mute through the whole thing, and they act things out in pantomime. And they kind of act like clowns in the traditional circus sense, or maybe mimes, or maybe a jester is a better analogy, since the show contained a good bit of satire on modern life. So the whole act was founded by these three guys from New York named Phil Stanton, Chris Wink, and Matt Goldman. And they said they picked the number 3 since that was the smallest number where you could have an other, meaning two blue men could gang up on the third, who became the other. And why were they blue? Well, because that was the most common color they could think of that didn't have any other strong racial or societal associations. I guess they never watched the Smurfs growing up. Am I right? So that leads me to the man part of the name. And, hey, it's 2024. So now I want to know, where are the blue women? They founded this thing in 87. That's nearly 40 years ago. But I'm not sure that calling it Blue Man Group passes the smell test in this day and age. And I actually did some hunting around on this point and found it surprisingly hard to find out their stance on women being blue men. Maybe because Blue Man Group is not nearly as popular as it was 20 years ago. So being less relevant, maybe it's getting talked about proportionately less. But I did find one interview with them in 2021 where they spoke to this point. They said there was one woman who portrayed a blue man in the Boston production, Andrea Johnson, who worked with them from 1999 to 2001, according to Wikipedia, which, as we know, is the next best thing to learning something. And another passed auditions but decided not to proceed. So hopefully my info is just old and incomplete, and there have been more, but that's all I've discovered. So, they did claim that they don't restrict the role to only men or do anything to discourage women, but they also did say that they had a minimum height requirement of 5'10". So they admitted that, yeah, there was a kind of de facto effect of disqualifying many women. And I don't know about that. I mean, I know enough about women to know they come in all kinds of heights. Plenty are over 5'10". I know we have women flying fighter jets in the Navy. I'm pretty sure there are many who could handle being a blue man. But, they also hedged, saying they placed a premium on the blue men having a similar look and build. It was very important to the show, implying it might be weird to have 2 men and 1 woman in a show. So I'm also calling bullshit here because, you could also have all of them be women, couldn't you? I don't know. I'm just saying I'm not really buying it. Anyway, for now, it's still Blue Man Group, and they're primarily men on stage. For sure, the show I caught was 3 dudes. And for what it's worth, I guess I myself am out of the running since I'm too short. And also, I'm way too handsome, or so I'm told. Yeah, right. Whatever. What else do I remember? They had a ton of energy. All the drumming just reinforced that. They spewed colored paint out of their chests while drumming, which made a hell of a mess. I wouldn't have wanted to be the one who had to clean up this show every night. They threw marshmallows into each other's mouths from across the stage. Like, a lot of marshmallows. Way more than you would expect would fit in someone's mouth. And then the guy who had them all in his mouth spat them out into a big gooey pile and put a price tag on it like it was sculpture, which was pretty funny. I think it's okay if I spoil these 30-year-old bits, right? Yeah, that's okay. They ate Captain Crunch together, a bit of product placement that led to me trying Captain Crunch for the first time, and let's just say I wasn't impressed. Then they injected paint into gumballs and threw the gumballs into a guy's mouth. This was after the marshmallows, not the same time. But still, imagine catching a big gumball in your mouth at 20 feet. That thing's either going to chip a tooth or go right down your trachea and choke you to death. So maybe you need to be up on your CPR to be a blue man too. In your audition, they have Jerry and HR eat a hot dog real quick, and you have to give him the Heimlich to get the gig. I don't know. Anyway, this guy crushed up the gumballs in his mouth and spat the paint all over a canvas, and they put a price tag on that too. The funny thing, though, is they were actually selling these paintings in the gift shop, and naturally, I bought one. This thing here that I have was created on stage at the Luxor in 2000 or so, although I don't think it was the exact show I saw. They had a bunch you could pick from. And, the blue here that they put in the corner, they told me was the blue man's signature. He took some paint from his head and stuck it on the corner there. So that's pretty cool. And this has been hanging in the bunker wall here for nigh on 20 years. Weirdly, no one has ever asked me about it. So what else? They did a whole bit in the dark wearing electroluminescent clothes. That bit anticipated Daft Punk doing much the same thing a decade later. But, hey, Blue Man Group did it first. There was a ton of drumming. They had a whole band there. These folks were not in the Blue Man costumes, but had their own crazy outfits. And I remember one lady who had to jump up every time she went to hit this crash cymbal that was hanging from the ceiling of her station. Kind of like John Stanier of Battles and his super high crash cymbal. So that was fun. The most amazing thing to me, though, was the finale, because they absolutely blasted the KLF's Last Train to Trans Central, see episode 16, turned up the strobes, and dropped about 6 miles of toilet paper and confetti on the audience. So cue about 5 minutes of complete sensory overload as we all worked together to extricate ourselves from this giant papery mess. We were just pushing piles of it over our heads, laughing and yelling, only to dump it at the back of the theater, after which the Blue Men struck their customary victory pose and everyone cheered, and we stumbled off to the gift shop, where I bought my painting. One nice thing, though, was that the Blue Men and the band were there in the shop waiting for us, and we got to say hello and shake some hands. And, at this point, I gotta admit, I was so taken with the whole show that I shook the crash cymbal lady's hand and told her that she had absolutely the coolest gig in the world, which was kind of embarrassing in retrospect, but in the moment, she seemed pleased. And also, side note, a Blue Man did actually talk to me, because when I said I enjoyed the show, he quietly said, "Thank you," breaking character just a little bit. And that was the show. I left there with a real buzz just walking out of there. As a drummer, I was half thinking I should quit my boring IT job and apply for their band. But, you know, I was too short to be a blue man, but hell, I was tall enough to hit that crash cymbal. But a few years went by. I got into a lot of other music, some of which I've talked about on here. On a personal level, a lot was going on. Our wedding happened, a house happened, grad school happened, more work happened. And in 2003, more Blue Man Group happened. Because in April of that year, they dropped this, their second album, The Complex. Unlike Audio, this album featured a variety of vocalists, so it came across as more of a proper rock album with Blue Man tendencies rather than a Blue Man album with rock tendencies. This record is also pretty long. It's 14 tracks to Audio's 13 tracks, and in fact, The Complex has 15 songs because the last physical track has 2 songs. One is hidden after some silence. This album is similar to Audio but goes much further, following a much more familiar vocal pop format. It also rocks harder. The vocals are very nicely done for the most part. And interestingly, there are 2 cover songs here. One of White Rabbit, the psychedelic classic by Jefferson Airplane, and one of Donna Summer and Giorgio Moroder's disco classic, I Feel Love, which I'm ashamed to admit I wasn't even aware of when I first heard this record, back when I was 30-something. That's an awful and shameful thing to have to admit, but I was raised Catholic, so I feel the need to confess to you all. Needless to say, I got really into this song, and as much as I love the version on this album, for reasons I'll get into, I still do prefer Donna Summer's original, because, you know, I grew up loving me some Donna Summer. I had 2 of her 45s, or, you know, my parents did, and I just listened to them all the time from a very young age. One was Hot Stuff from 1979's Bad Girls album, which we didn't have, and the other was sort of this ballad disco song called No More Tears, Enough Is Enough, which was a duet with Barbra Streisand, of all people. I guess it made sense in 79 when Barbara was really popular. Hang on a minute. That's the same year as Hot Stuff. So, what the hell? You know, I guess Donna Summer was on a roll in 79, folks. Maybe, just maybe, and bear with me here, maybe she was on a roll from I Feel Love coming out 2 years earlier in 1977. Do I hear a hallelujah? Because I have to tell you, Donna's I Feel Love is the root of just about everything I love about electronic music, period. End of sentence. When I first heard the original after going down the Blue Man Group White Rabbit hole after listening to The Complex and digging into that song's history, it was like coming home for the first time. And I gotta say, I really enjoy the YouTube clip of Donna Summer performing this live, supposedly with a full band in 77, because, folks, we know Giorgio Moroder and his studio assistant Robbie Whittle crafted this entire song with a Moog synthesizer, including the drums. So I don't know what the guitarist is pretending to do in that video, but he is not on this track at all. And, you know, naturally this song is a classic, a milestone of electronic music, a window into the future by several decades, and it's been duly covered many, many times. I would eventually get to know other versions of it, like the one done by Curve, see episode 62, but Donna Summer's original version is still the bomb. It is the uncut root of the techno tree, so props where they're due. But I do love this version, and it is going to take us in a new direction here in this story in just a minute, because Blue Man Group is just the first part of this story. So let's look at The Complex. It has a nice graphic sort of cover, kind of flat but simple and iconic. It's memorable, probably looks good on a bumper sticker. As it turns out, and unlike Audio, this is a concept album. It has something to say about American society and technology circa 2003. Go figure. So let's look at the booklet here. Flip through it. some dystopic sort of imagery in here. The theme for this concept album is really not that far removed from The Wall and the Downward Spiral, really. See episode 61. And why do I say that about all concept albums? They're all kind of like The Wall and the Downward Spiral. Because maybe at the bottom of it all, there really is just one concept, but many albums. And that one concept is, the feeling you get as a human being who's emotionally disengaged and isolated from everyone else. Just feeling different. Have you ever felt that way? I'm going to hazard a guess and say that, yeah, we all have. It's pretty universal. Which is why we all keep buying these concept albums that are all about the same concept. But nevertheless, Blue Man Group here tries to give us a way out of the despair. And they do it by deconstructing the rock concert experience in a somewhat fun way. And they do this by introducing the standard rock concert movements. There's rock concert movement number 1, the head bob. Number 2, the one-armed fist pump. And number 3, the vertical jump. And the subsequent live tour would take this idea to an absurd extreme, which I'll talk about in a minute. But first I want to point out the array of guest vocalists here. We have Tracy Bonham singing a couple songs, and I have to admit, like many of these vocalists, I had never heard of her prior to buying this record, but she did a fantastic job on these 2 songs. And then we have Aaron Dyer doing a track, someone named Esther on White Rabbit, Peter Moore on a couple tracks, Gavin Rossdale of Bush fame singing The Current, which is probably the most rockin' song here. And we even have my arch nemesis, Dave Matthews, doing a song. And finally, Annette Streen singing I Feel Love. Now, I had never heard of Annette before or her band, Venus Hum, but I like this song. I probably would have liked this song if Axl Rose had sung it. Let's just imagine that for a second. Oh. Anyway, it's just a great song. It almost doesn't matter who sings it, but I do love this Blue Man Group version. It's very close to the original. They do it justice. So how could I not like it? And that's where I left things for a few months. I kind of went about my 2003. I was listening to The Complex along with other stuff, like the No Twist and the Beta Band and whatever. I don't know, the new KMFDM, I guess. And then in the summer, I caught wind that Blue Man Group were actually going to go on tour, a proper concert tour, and they were morphing a little bit from theater residencies to playing arenas. And as it turned out, they were coming right to me, and I would be an idiot not to catch them since I'd have to drive all of 30 miles out of my way. So catch them I did on the appropriately titled Complex Rock Tour Live, which focused heavily on the new vocal material, but still had a few fan favorites from the first album, like Drumbone, which I don't think I've explained before, but it was something like a trombone, but it's actually a drum kind of thing that they made out of PVC. Trust me, it's part of a funny bit they do on stage, and it's a pretty good song to boot. So the night of, we trooped into the arena and got our seats. We were directly in front, a couple rows up from the floor, and the opening band comes on, and lo and behold, it's Venus Hum. Turns out they were a trio featuring Annette Streen, who's the answer to the question, what do you get if Lisa Loeb could sing like Tony Halliday? And then there were 2 guys, Kip Cuban and Tony Miracle, both of which sound like fake names to me, but they assure us they're really not fake. Who knows? These guys pretty much play synths and a bit of guitar. So anyway, they play synth pop as a band, which is right up my alley. And Annette demonstrates some serious vocal talent. And all in all, I'm digging their act, which is something that I don't often say for an opening band. And I make a mental note to track their CD down later. So after they leave, we're waiting for Blue Man Group, and suddenly we notice a couple scrolling text displays, one on either side of the stage, and they start to show funny messages, playing off each other, and the whole idea that people can't easily read both messages at the same time. And we would see this idea used by bands a decade or so later, like Massive Attack, for instance, who'd cover their stage with a lot of scrolling text displays. So It seemed kind of original at the time, or was it? Because after all, media saturation was kind of the point of U2's Zoo TV tour in the early 90s. So, I don't know, maybe Blue Man Group are slightly updating this idea. So the band comes on, and what a band. They've greatly expanded from the Luxor show, just tons of guitars and drums up there, Chapman stick, all sorts of stuff, plus the vocalists. Although no Dave Matthews, fortunately. I guess he had a better offer. But sure enough, Blue Man Group introduce Rock Concert Movement number 63, bringing out Venus Hum, and Annette and the boys come back out to join in the performance of I Feel Love. The Blue Men dressed Annette in this electronic light-up dress that looked like a birthday cake on acid, and in short, they really nailed the song, cementing my interest in this little band. So shortly after that, and I mean like very shortly, like the following week, they released this, the Complex Rock Tour Live on DVD, which I snapped up. It pretty much has the entire show on here. I have not watched this in forever, but I did watch it a bunch back in the day. I remember even showing it to my kids once they were old enough to enjoy it, and they did enjoy it. Something about the Blue Men, I think, really appeals to people of all ages. And I would even take my kids to see Blue Man Group when they were a little older. Well, one of them anyway. But maybe I should watch this again just for kicks. So probably that same afternoon, I zipped over to the music store and picked this up. Big Beautiful Sky, the album by Venus Hum. It was their second proper album, as it turned out. And in short, I was just delighted with it. It was synth pop, but with a bit of a dance edge. It has songs on here like Hummingbirds and Sonic Boom that pack a pretty good wallop, but it's probably about as heavy as things get here. Songs like Soul Sloshing and Montana are great dance tracks, but they're very upbeat and very major key, not to mention extremely catchy. Honestly, a few of these songs are maybe a bit saccharine for my tastes, like Lumberjacks and The Bells. But the good stuff here is very good indeed. And by the way, I've learned that their funny name comes from a medical condition that Tony Miracle has, a Venus hum, Venous, which is a thing where he can hear his own heartbeat in his ears. But, you know, I can sometimes hear my own heartbeat too. So maybe I have this. I don't know. Or maybe it's a common thing. Can everyone hear their own heartbeat? I can actually hear it sometimes when I'm just sitting here and not just during exercise. It's kind of like a rushing sound. Regardless, that's where the name comes from. And I guess some people thought it was Venus like the planet, or that it was the lead singer's name, but obviously it's not. So I'm glad we straightened all that out. Anyway, just imagine my delight when a few months went by and I discovered that the band were going on tour on their own without Blue Man Group. And weirdly enough, they would be playing a gig just a few miles from where I live. It was pretty strange that they were going from playing to tens of thousands of people in a big arena tour to just playing the dining hall at a local school. But I had no choice but to check this out. So I rolled over there one night. I got myself a cup of coffee and I watched the band set up their gear on this itty-bitty tiny stage. And as I recall, they had synths, mics, guitars. I don't think they had a live drummer. That's too bad. I firmly believe that every electronic band should have a live drummer when playing shows, preferably on an acoustic kit, even if it's over the electronic drum track. It just adds a ton to the live show. But they did have something else that was really special, and that was Annette's voice. And she just killed it there, as she had at the Blue Man Group show, even without the trippy acid dress. And I remember they played some newer songs, and afterward I had a chance to say hello to the band and pick up their new EP at the time, Songs for Superheroes, which was also a fun listen. And you gotta love this extreme early 2000s design aesthetic, huh? It's just another little digipack here. Just, you know, very cool design. I like it. So I left this show buzzing again pretty well, feeling lucky that they put on this show so close to me and that I had the sense and foresight to catch it. And believe me, I've missed a ton of good shows since then, so that one felt pretty special. So I did feel like I had a bit of a personal connection to Venus Hum for a little while there, having caught them twice and the second time in such close quarters and chatting with them. But it would be a couple more years before they released any new material, and by then, a lot had happened for me. I'd become a dad. I was no longer keeping up with all the latest cool music. Not really keeping up with the latest cool anything. No longer spending days traveling all over the tri-state area to scour used record stores. And nor was I going out to shows. In fact, I don't think I'd go to an actual rock concert again until 2008, when I met my now bandmate, and he dragged me out to see this little band called School of Seven Bells that some of you may have heard of. And they were awesome, of course, and completely blew me away. Cue a montage of going to see a ton of great bands with him over the years. And most recently, The Cure, see episode 25. Just a lot of great shared memories there over the last 16 years or so and counting, not to mention barbecue. But yeah, I fell out of touch with Venus Hum. They'd go on to release 4 more albums over the next 17 years, maybe a bit too spread out for me to climb aboard that train. If Setlist FM is to be believed, they'd become more or less a bedroom band, playing only one show since 2004, a gig in Cincinnati in 2010. And I find that kind of hard to believe. I have to think they've played more shows that just didn't get recorded on that site. Also heard that they had done a collaboration with J.J. Abrams on Lost, though I don't watch TV at all, so I have no idea what that was about. But this discussion is reminding me that I have to pick up their more recent albums. I do encourage you to check them out if you're a fan of the bands I've been talking about, because they are right up this show's alley. At least go out to YouTube and check out songs like Hummingbirds and Montana. Really good stuff. So what about Blue Man Group? What happened next? Well, I guess we all know they cashed in a bit. They would continue the arena tour for a while, the so-called How to Be a Megastar tour, which as far as I can tell was the complex rock tour tarted up a bit. By that point, I had gotten the gist of the act, and soon enough, it seemed that Blue Man Group were played out. They had just done all the things that famous acts did. They were on The Simpsons, they did commercials for Intel, they were on Jay Leno, they were on Fetch with Ruff Ruffman, all the usual shark-jumping stuff. Nothing they did after that point really grabbed me, and it seemed to me that they went back into the theaters and were satisfied to continue doing the big productions. And looking online, I see that they did make a third album called 3, appropriately enough, in 2016. It's instrumental as well. I never heard it. I understand they built a whole bunch of new instruments for it, but I guess what I'm saying is by then they were sort of a known factor to me, a little less interesting. And this show isn't necessarily about how I feel about a band now, though. More about what made them great in their prime. And for me, for sure, Blue Man Group were great in their prime. So, yeah, I really haven't thought about them at all in 15 years. But back in the day, for sure, they had a big impact on me, and I was into them. Me and a lot of people. They helped blur that line between music, comedy, and performance art, which itself was interesting. And they were a legit touring band for a bunch of years. Packing houses, playing rock songs, but with the exception of a few known vocalists, doing it in a largely anonymous way, which I also find kind of interesting, because I don't think anyone's ever become famous from being a blue man, to my knowledge. Even the 3 founders are largely unknown to the general public. So I had to hand it to them for being inventive, original, and entertaining. Well, there you have it, folks. Blue Man Group. Once they belonged to New York City, but now they belong to the world. If you think about it, if they just added a horror element to their show, they would be pretty much like Skinny Puppy, but way more terrifying. Yep, there it is. There's the thought to go out on, that one right there. You're listening to Stronger Than Reason either on YouTube or as an Apple or Spotify podcast. The show that now has an attack spider. Yes, you heard that right. Dave, the very small wolf spider, has set up shop here near the bunker's back door, and he's been reliably there through August, eating bugs and keeping an eye on things. 8 eyes, actually. I think Dave is amusing because he pretty much just sits there, and the only time I've seen him move is when I slam the door too hard and he gets scared and hides behind the siding. But he's got a mean streak a mile wide, I'm warning you. Look at the bones. Oh, wait, he doesn't have any bones. Look at the exoskeleton. As always, thank you for listening, and until next time, stay strong.